This well did not give water that morning, it gave back death. The frost had come early to the hills of Albemarle County, coating the brittle grass and rusted iron gates of the Fairhillow Plantation with a veil of white silence. Roosters cried against a gray sky still thick with the last breath of night, but the air remained still, unnaturally still. No dog barked. No boots struck the earth. The bell, usually rung by sunrise, hung motionless in the tower above the smokehouse. Only sound was the wind brushing low across the field, like it too was holding its tongue. Then came the scream. It tore across the quiet like a blade, sharp, raw, unmistakably white. From the edge of the yard, near the stone well where slaves drew their first buckets of water for the morning chores, a house girl staggered backward, hand to her mouth, dropping the iron dipper that clanged against the frozen dirt. Down in the well, something floated. She called for help, though not too loud, for fear of being blamed. Two overseers arrived in hurried coats, lanterns raised, peering down. One turned away and retched into the grass. The other swore and sent for the master, but he was already riding south for business, gone before sunup. The body had to be pulled up with ropes, pale arms tangled in her own nightgown, hair soaked and clinging to her neck like vines. It was her, Mrs. Evelyn Whitcomb, mistress of Fairhillow, dead in the well that had quenched hundreds of throats but would never be touched again. They said she must have slipped, perhaps gone out too early, disoriented, perhaps looking for her dog, perhaps some spell had taken her in the night. But behind the perhaps were whispers, low ones passed in kitchens and fields, carried beneath breath like secrets too dangerous to name aloud, because the well was deep. And so was the hate of those who drew from it. Martha had been the last to see her, some said. Others swore they saw her walking away from the well before sunrise, eyes calm, sleeves wet. But no one could prove anything, and no one wanted to draw water from the well ever again. Not after what it gave back, not after it proved it remembered. At Fairhillow Plantation, dawn did not rise gently. It arrived with the metallic cry of the bell, rusted but relentless, swinging above the smokehouse with every clang like a commandment. The sound cut through the fields like a lash, summoning the enslaved from shacks colder than the frostbitten fields outside. Within minutes, doors creaked open, bare feet hit frozen dirt, and lines of black bodies trudged toward labor before light kissed the hills. The fields stretched wide and skeletal, dotted with the stumps of last season's tobacco. Winter meant clearing brush, mending fences, cleaning the tools that would soon break their backs again. Smoke rose from chimneys not to warm bones, but to cure meat the enslaved would never taste. The smokehouse was stocked, always, with salt pork and game. The big house boasted 3 hearths and silverware that caught sunlight like it belonged to God himself. Its windows were clear as mirrors. The quarters had no glass at all, only shutters, warped and wheezing in the wind. Inside the quarters, children cried from hunger before crying from cold. Ash was rubbed into cracked hands to seal the skin from splitting open. Mothers stitched rags into quilts made of scraps from dresses discarded by the mistress. Rats danced through the floors at night. Lice like secrets were passed from head to head, but at the center of it all stood the well. It was a simple structure, stone-lined, roofed with cedar shingles darkened by years of weather and moss. A crank and chain lowered the bucket down into the cool blackness where water slept. It was the first place visited each morning and the last place passed at night. It gave life to crops, washed blood from wounds, and soaked linens stained by the lash. It was where whispers were exchanged while the bucket was rising, news from the field, warnings about the overseer's moods, quiet questions about loved ones sold. The well remembered everything. It stood between the quarters and the house, like a mute witness to all that passed between cruelty and survival. The mistress passed by it daily, her perfume lingering in the air long after she was gone. Martha had drawn from it more times than she could count, eyes on the rope, lips shut, hands steady. But one morning the rope had gone down for the mistress, and not come back up, not until she floated. Martha never raised her voice. She never questioned an order, never moved too fast or too slow. Her walk was steady, her eyes lowered. When the mistress spoke, she listened with her hands folded, her breath held. She nodded when expected. She thanked when struck. To those who looked only once, she seemed the model of obedience. the kind of slave the mistress liked to display to dinner guests as well-trained. But obedience is a costume, and Martha had worn it so long it fit like skin. She stood just above 5 feet, shoulders slightly hunched from years of labor, but her movements were precise, neither rushed nor clumsy. Her hands bore old burns from the hearth, calluses from chopping root vegetables, and long-heeled whip scars thin as fishing line. She was neither young nor old, just, worn smooth by time. Her hair was always tied in a dark cloth, her dress clean but coarse. There was never mud on her hem, Martha moved too carefully for that. Every morning before even the bell rang, Martha went to the well. She preferred it before others arrived. Alone in the mist, she'd let the bucket sink slow, the creak of the chain like an old hymn. She'd wrap both hands around the wooden grip, muscles flexing as she turned the crank. Her shoulders were stronger than they looked, quietly built over years of lifting and carrying, burying and enduring. She would stare into the water before drawing it up. Some days she whispered to it, just a word, just a name. No one heard. Her grief was layered deep like silt. It didn't show on her face, but it lived in her posture. She never forgot anything, not the day her mother disappeared behind the smokehouse, not the scream of her child as he slipped by the well's edge, not the lie that followed, spoken in the mistress's voice. He should have known better. Martha knew better. She knew how to wait. In the quarters, others sometimes asked her for advice, quietly always. She gave few words, only glances and nods. Her silence was not fear. It was discipline, protection. And beneath it all, there lived a memory sharp as a blade. And a ledger, written not on paper, but in pain. And when the time came, she would remember every entry. Evelyn Whitcomb, mistress of Fairhollow, was the kind of woman whose cruelty never raised its voice. It didn't need to. It wore perfume, silk gloves, and a smile as sharp as a hooked needle. Her power did not come from beatings, that was the overseer's role. Hers was more refined. She preferred degradation wrapped in manners. She did not yell, she whispered. She did not strike with fists, she slapped with fingers that wore gold rings and lace. Her insults came with sugar. Poor thing, your skin is so rough, she'd say, tracing the whip scars on Martha's arms. Or you do try, don't you? After Martha had scrubbed the floor until her knuckles bled. She was not uneducated. She was cultured, well-read, and vicious in her precision. The master, Charles Whitcomb, was gone more than he was home, off managing cotton trades in Richmond or spending nights in neighboring towns. When present, he was detached, preferring to let Evelyn handle the house matters. To the enslaved, that meant she ruled unchecked. No one challenged her commands, not even her husband, especially not him. Evelyn had no children. Some whispered that God had refused her womb. Others believed she'd driven them out herself, too cold to carry life. But she called herself mother of the house all the same, and what she could not birth, she controlled, through fear, through vanity, through daily demonstrations of power. The plantation ran on hierarchy, and beneath Evelyn stood the overseers, pale-eyed men with cracked voices and cracked knuckles. Mr. Baines, the head overseer, rarely spoke but often grinned. His whip was nicknamed Mercy, and he used it like punctuation. His younger assistant, Caleb, was meaner still, barely 20, but with a hunger for violence that made dogs whine when he walked past. House servants had their own order. Nella the cook kept her eyes down. Ruth, who polished the mistress's boots, often trembled when touched. Everyone knew that proximity to Evelyn meant danger. Her moods shifted like wind through winter trees, cold, sudden, and without warning. But none bore the brunt of her cruelty like Martha. Perhaps it was Martha's silence that offended her, or her memory, or her resemblance to a past Evelyn couldn't erase. Whatever it was, the mistress made Martha her mirror, one she tried to crack a little more each day, until one day it cracked back. The cold that month felt deeper than usual, as if the earth itself had clenched its jaw. Fires burned lower, pipes cracked, chickens stopped laying, and at Fairhollow something heavier than frost settled into the soil, a silence that felt watchful. In the quarters, slaves began to whisper, not loud, not often, just in fragments. She's marked, that one. The well's full of something that ain't just water. Her mama's spirit ain't done yet. Martha said nothing, but she listened, always. Some swore they saw her standing at the well long after nightfall, unmoving, as if the moon itself had rooted her there. Others claimed she was speaking in tongues beneath her breath, prayers, maybe, or curses old as the ocean. One child said he saw the well shimmer like it was boiling, though no steam rose and no fire was near. The mistress noticed the change in the air, but she didn't understand it. What she felt as paranoia, others recognized as a shifting. Evelyn's hand grew heavier, her voice sharper. She accused Martha of stealing cloth, of dulling the knives, of letting mice into the parlor. One morning she slapped her hard enough to split her lip, then hissed, "Don't test me, girl, you think silence protects you. I see through it." But Martha only blinked, blood trickling down her chin, eyes empty as stone. That night, wind howled through the cracks in the quarters. Martha couldn't sleep. Her cot creaked with every breath. From outside, she heard the groaning of the well's old rope swaying gently on its own. No one else was there. No one should have been. Then came the whisper, not a voice, but a knowing. It wasn't in her ears, it was in her bones. She sat up slowly, eyes on the shutter, then rose and walked out barefoot into the night. Frost crackled beneath her steps. Her breath bloomed white in the dark. She stopped at the well and placed her palm on the stones. They were warm. Beneath her hand, the stone pulsed like it held a heartbeat. She didn't flinch, because something inside her had begun to rise. Not rage, not fear, memory. And memory, when fed long enough, becomes hunger. Before she was the quiet woman who drew water before sunrise, Martha had been someone else. A daughter, a mother, a soul still soft in places the world hadn't yet scarred. That was long ago, back when her voice still had color, before silence became her only safety. Her mother's name was Dinah. Strong-backed, proud-spined, too proud for the mistress's liking. Dinah had once dared to argue when Evelyn accused her of breaking a porcelain basin. Dinah hadn't broken it, the mistress herself had dropped it in a fit of fury, but the lie needed a body to bury it in. They took Dinah behind the smokehouse. No trial, no mercy, just the snapping whip and the mistress watching from the porch with arms folded and lips curled. Martha was 14. She listened to every scream. And when it ended, she walked the path behind the smokehouse for days, hoping her mother might rise again through the clay. She never did. Years later, Martha bore a child, a son named Caleb, with eyes too bright for a world like Fairhillow. She kept him close, taught him how to speak low and run fast. But at 7 years old, he was too small to carry the heavy bucket. That didn't stop the mistress. One winter morning, before the sun had even stretched its arms, Evelyn sent him out with an empty pail, saying, "If your mama's too slow, you'll learn to be faster." Martha found him face down at the well's edge, skull split on stone, water frozen around his fingertips. The pail had tipped and rolled into the brush. Evelyn claimed he must have slipped, called it a sad little accident, and offered Martha an extra scrap of cloth for his burial. Martha took the cloth and buried it empty, because there was no body. They dumped it down the well. The mistress didn't want the mess. From that day on, Martha spoke less. She bowed deeper. She obeyed with eerie precision. But inside, something ancient began to fester. Not grief. Not just grief. Legacy. The same hands that had buried her mother now buried her son. The well had taken 2 generations from her. It was only fair that it give one back. And if it could take the innocent, she would make it swallow the guilty. It was Sunday, the day the mistress claimed was for rest, though none rested in the quarters. The air was bitter and dry, the kind that cracked lips and made even the whip burn slower across skin. After church service, Evelyn Whitcomb gathered the household out front, her voice as sweet as molasses and twice as sticky. She wore blue silk and a fur shawl that once belonged to her mother. Her boots were polished to a mirror shine. At her side, 2 overseers stood with arms folded, and behind them, the field hands had been dragged from their routines to stand in a half-moon shape in the yard. Martha stood near the center, hands clasped, eyes low. The mistress cleared her throat like she was about to deliver a sermon. Instead, she held up a torn piece of parchment. "This," she said with mock sadness, "was found under one of the beds in the quarters, a forged pass, an attempt to flee." She let the words hang, then she pointed at Martha. "Her brother Jeremiah, he ran, tried to pass through Richmond. He's been sold, southbound, gone." Martha didn't flinch. A week before, Evelyn had promised his freedom in exchange for Martha's loyalty. Had sworn on her good Christian name that Jeremiah's papers were being drawn up. Martha had bent her spine to that lie, had scraped her hands raw polishing floors to seal the deal. Now she saw it for what it was, a leash dressed as mercy. "And you," Evelyn sneered, stepping toward Martha, "you knew, didn't you?" Martha said nothing. "Then show them your place." Martha hesitated. Evelyn nodded to the overseers. With rifle butts at her back, Martha dropped to her knees. The dirt was cold. Small stones cut into her skin. Evelyn stepped close, leaned in. "Open your mouth," she whispered. Martha didn't move. The slap cracked loud. Evelyn's glove left a welt. "I said open it." Martha obeyed, and Evelyn spat in her mouth, gasps, silence. Somewhere a child whimpered. Martha closed her lips slowly and swallowed, not the spit, the moment. She stood when ordered to, straightened her skirt, and returned to the quarters. But something inside her had turned to iron. No more bargaining. No more waiting. That night she didn't cry. She went to the well and placed both hands on the rim. The stone was warm again, she understood now, it was ready, and so was she. The well stood in silence, but Martha heard it speaking. Not in words, but in weight, in pull. It had taken her son, now it waited for balance. She began to study it, not like a servant, but like a surgeon. By day she drew water with practiced grace, eyes lowered, hands steady. But her mind measured each motion. The depth of the drop, the width of the rim, the layer of green moss on the inner stones. The way the lip curved outward, offering no grip once fingers slipped beneath it. At night she listened. Wind whistled through the trees like breath through teeth. The chain hanging from the pulley creaked when it turned on its own, metal brushing wood like a shiver. And sometimes, in the space between sleep and waking, Martha heard the splash again, not from memory but from prophecy. "If the well took my child," her thoughts whispered, slow and heavy, "then it will take hers." She began to watch Evelyn more closely. The mistress had patterns like all things obsessed with control. She walked the grounds every third morning before the bell rang, claiming it was to inspect the order. Sometimes she brought her little lapdog, sometimes not. Always she passed the well, always alone. Martha bided her time. She didn't change her face. She didn't sharpen a blade or mix herbs. Her weapon wasn't forged in fire or brewed in shadow. It was patience and memory. She rehearsed the moment again and again, how she would walk slowly behind her, how she would speak not in rage but in calm just once, how her hands would not tremble, how she would not scream. She knew Evelyn would fight, her nails would tear, her feet would kick, but the stones were slick, the edge was low, and water, like grief, was stronger than flesh. The night she chose was moonless. The kind where even breath disappears in the dark. She did not sleep. She braided her hair tight, scrubbed her arms clean, and wrapped herself in the old cloth her mother once wore. Not mourning clothes, war clothes. Then she sat by the window and waited for the third morning bell. When it rang, she did not flinch. She rose with the cold and walked toward the well, slow, steady, silent. And behind her the earth did not weep. It listened. The dawn had not yet broken. The world held its breath beneath a black sky, heavy with the scent of frost and coal smoke. No stars, no birds, just the quiet rhythm of footsteps across hard-packed earth. Evelyn Whitcomb walked briskly toward the well, her wool cloak drawn tight, heels clicking like hammer strikes. She carried a lantern in one hand, its flame small and unsure. In the other she held her leather-bound notebook, muttering about inventory. Her breath fogged in front of her, vanishing before it could rise. Behind her, silent as shadow, walked Martha. No apron, no bucket, just bare hands, steady and cold. The mistress stopped by the well, annoyed. The chain had frozen stiff, refusing to lower. Martha stepped closer. "You shouldn't be out here," Evelyn snapped without turning. "I draw the water every morning," Martha replied, voice low. "Not without permission." Evelyn turned then, eyes narrow with something between suspicion and contempt. "Don't forget your place. Or perhaps you want to follow your brother." Martha didn't answer. Her gaze dropped not in fear but in finality. "You deaf now?" Evelyn barked, stepping forward. "Answer me." She raised her hand and slapped Martha across the cheek. It landed with a wet crack. Martha staggered but did not fall. Instead, she lifted her eyes. No rage, no tears, only stillness. And in that breathless space between strike and retaliation, something ancient passed between them. not woman to woman but victim to executioner. Then Martha moved. She grabbed Evelyn by the wrist and shoulder, spinning her toward the well. The mistress shrieked, struggling, dropping the lantern. Firelight rolled across the ground and guttered out. They grappled at the rim, Martha's arms tight, Evelyn clawing with wild panic. Nails raked Martha's neck. A fist caught her jaw, but Martha did not loosen her grip. Their bodies slammed against the stone. Evelyn kicked, scratched, screamed into the trees. No one came. The well yawned behind them, black and endless. Martha leaned in close, her breath calm. "You sent my son here," she whispered. Evelyn froze, eyes wide. Then Martha twisted her one sudden, brutal motion and pushed. The body pitched forward. A scream rang out, then a splash, then silence. The ripples faded. The water closed. And Fairhillow's cruelest mistress vanished beneath the surface of the very well she had so often passed without a second thought. Martha stood there a moment longer, steadying her breath. Then she turned, adjusted her shawl, and walked away without a sound. Behind her the stones were wet, and the well had fed. By sunrise, Fairhillow was no longer still. The mistress's bed lay untouched. Her boots sat by the hearth, unscuffed. Her cloak, wet with dew, was found slung across a fence post near the well. A dropped lantern lay blackened in the dirt. The master was still away, unreachable. And the one person who ruled with iron gloves had simply vanished. It didn't take long before the house servants began to murmur. She didn't come in from her walk. No one saw her since before the bell. She never missed morning tea. Overseer Baines was the first to shout. He ordered a full sweep of the grounds. Dogs were brought out, but they whined near the well, tails tucked, refusing to go further. Caleb, the younger overseer, approached with a rope and hook. His hands trembled. By midday, they pulled her up, soaked, slack-jawed. One eye open, the other veiled in blood. Her dress tangled like seaweed, one slipper missing. Her pale hand looked like porcelain reaching up from death. Someone screamed, another crossed himself. No one spoke Martha's name, not at first, but eyes turned. She had been the last to see the mistress. That much everyone knew. A house girl had passed her near the well just before dawn. Said Martha looked calm. Said her dress was dry. Said her eyes were strange. Baines cornered her near the sugar shed. "You seen her?" Martha looked him straight in the face. "Not since yesterday," she said. Nothing more. She was neither trembling nor smug, just still, too still. They searched her quarters, found nothing. Not a thread, not a note, not a sign of struggle. "She's hiding something," Caleb muttered, but silence cannot be punished without proof, so Martha remained free. And yet fear took root. The well, once the pulse of the plantation, stood untouched. No one drew from it that day. Nella boiled creek water for stew. Children were told to stay away from it, as if it might reach up and pull them down. Some said the water was cursed now, others said it had been all along. By nightfall, a new rule was set. No one goes to the well alone, ever. The bucket stayed raised. The chain stiffened with frost, and in the air around Fairhillow something shifted. The overseers watched the quarters with wider eyes. And the enslaved, they whispered one word in awe: Martha. Did not take long for whispers to harden into accusations. A field boy, frightened into speaking, said he saw Martha trailing the mistress before dawn. A kitchen girl, trembling under Baines's glare, claimed Martha's hem was damp that morning. None could swear to what they saw, but in Virginia, suspicion was enough. Martha was seized in the yard 3 days later. Her hands were bound, though she did not resist. She walked with her head high, lips sealed, as if even now she chose her silence over their noise. Some of the enslaved wept when they dragged her away. Others looked on in awe, as if watching a prophet led to slaughter. The trial was swift. In the courthouse of Albemarle County, 12 white men sat like stone pillars, their eyes narrowing at the sight of her. The charge, murder of a mistress. The evidence, none but rumor. The verdict was never in question. They did not argue her humanity, because to them she had none. They called her it, called her beast, called her demon. Yet beneath the words was something else. Fear. Fear of the way she sat without trembling. Fear of her refusal to beg. Fear of the silence that filled the room thicker than any plea. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, Martha only looked up. Not at him. Not at the jurors. At the ceiling beams, as if listening for the creak of a rope she already knew was waiting. Then it is death, the gavel fell. By hanging. Some said she was led to the gallows within the week. Others swore she was locked in the jailhouse and vanished from records overnight, her name scratched out as if fire had burned through the page. But those who lived near the well told a different story. They said the rope snapped before it ever tightened. They said the guards who kept her cell found the door open at dawn, chains unfastened, straw cold. No body, no grave, no marker, only absence. And silence. The same silence she had carried all her life. The same silence that had drowned cruelty in the well. And from then on, silence became her monument, because Fairhellow lost a mistress. But Virginia gained a legend. Time swallowed Fairhellow the way the well had swallowed its mistress. By the end of the war, the fields were stripped bare, the big house burned to timber, and the overseers scattered to ash and memory. But the well remained. People began to call it by a new name. Not the Whitcomb Well, not Fairhellow's well. It became the Well of Martha. Travelers passing through Virginia in the decades after spoke of it in low voices at taverns and campfires. They said you could find it by the sycamores leaning like sentinels in the field, stones slick with moss, chain rusted to silence. The kind of place a horse refused to cross. Children dared each other to creep close on hot nights. Some swore that when they leaned over the rim, they saw a pale face staring up, eyes open, hair drifting in dark water, lips parting as if ready to speak. Others ran screaming, insisting the water wasn't black but red, rippling like blood under the moon. Old freedmen told it differently. They said Martha never died at all, that she walked away from the jailhouse and back to the well where she made her home in the shadows. They claimed that if you passed by near midnight, you could hear her voice, low, humming the lullabies she once sang to a child long buried in its depths. And sometimes, if you stayed too long, you would hear a splash. Not the splash of a bucket. The splash of a body. Families in the county forbade their children from fetching water there. They built new pumps, dug new wells, but still the stories clung like ivy. The well grew into a legend, a warning, a curse. Some said it was holy vengeance. Others called it witchcraft, but none denied that the place breathed with something older, heavier, more enduring than brick or wood. For even when fields shifted hands, when masters' names changed, when houses rose and rotted again, the well stayed. And the silence around it remained as deep as the water inside. Martha's name was never carved into stone, never printed in any book of record, but the land remembered, the water remembered, the people, too, in whispers remembered. And still, on the hottest nights of Virginia summers, the tale is told. They said water gave life. But in Virginia, there is one well where water remembers death. If you carried Martha's silence, if you carried her grief, what would you have done standing at that well? Do you believe her name should be forgotten or remembered forever in our stories? Tell us in the comments below, and if you want more untold voices of our past, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel.